How you guys doing? A quick bio on me, which will kind of contextualize what I'm reading, is I just moved here from Georgia about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Are you from Georgia? Or?
I'm from Atlanta.
Oh wow! I just graduated from UGA in Athens, 3-4 years ago.
Cool.
This was written in that time frame, and so you'll obviously get the southern context out of it. This is set in Alabama in the 60s, and that's all I'll say because it's from the beginning. It was late in the evening when Ruth Clayton's water broke. She walked barefoot over the dry leaves and the straw of the forest, and she could feel the twigs snapping underfoot. She stopped briefly and doubled over by a tree heaving dryly. Then she brought the yoke of her dress to her nose, perfumed and fragrant, and the nausea ebbed. She walked on. The gibbous moon shone grayly in the sky, lighting the path toward the forest edge. When she emerged, however, the light was gone. A great shadow of a cloud had passed overhead, casting darkness down over Sardis. The chapel stood black and faceless in the plot before her, and she could tell by the warm static air that a storm was coming. She bent once more in the throes of labor. Then she turned up the narrow street and hurried north for the inn. She did not at 17 know much about childbirth, but she did know enough to be terrified. Once, a number of years ago, she had stayed over at the Atwoods with her friend Melanie while Mrs. Atwood had gone into labor. Melanie's father had tried to hustle his wife out to the car to take her to the clinic, but no, oh no, she wasn't getting off that couch. So the doctor had been called in, and the girls had come peeking around the corner, though they'd been told to stay in Melanie's room, and they had watched in horror as she had wept and bled and uttered all manner of obscenity, cursing even God himself. And Ruth had covered her eyes, for surely God would strike the woman dead where she sat, baby and all, for her profanities. But he had not struck her dead, nor had the men rebuked her. Instead, they had supported her, consoled her. And when Ruth and Melanie had scrambled back to the bedroom, they had just watched each other, giggling. The road now was turbulent with gravel. She held the flanks of her swollen middle like something independent of her body, something precious and cumbersome, which might fall to the ground if she let go. Small chips of pebble lay here and there among the sand and silt, and she advanced with systematic caution, placing first the naked heel of her lead foot, and then the ball, and then the digits, one by one, inward from the pinky toe. She had taken Pasture Drive, which ran wide, circumventing the houses, for it would be better to go into labor out here in this darkness than to do it at the heart of town. She could hardly bear to think what would happen if someone heard her cries and came running. They would find her quickly and help her out. But as soon as they saw the baby, they would know about Charlie, and then they would all be in danger. Only one other in town was privy to their affair, the innkeeper, an old German expatriate named Nicholas. He could be trusted. He had proven it just last year when he had entered one of the bedrooms of his inn to find the two of them locked together at the height of their passion. He had clapped a hand to his mouth and hurried in to pull Charlie off of her, but not until Ruth herself had cried out for him to stop, to let Charlie go, had he finally realized what was going on. It must have been unfathomable. Ruth Clayton, the daughter of the mayor, the town's unsullied maiden, in bed with a Negro? But Nicholas was a lonely man. The only visitors who ever stayed at his inn were local miners whose wives had run them off for the night to ruin someone else's sheets with the stink of their labor. Sardis, Alabama, was an enclave of a town some 70 miles south of Montgomery. It was tucked neatly away in a deep, vast wood of longleaf and loblolly pine and eastern hemlock, and the population, all white, was well shy of 1,000. Nicholas must have known the weight of his discovery. He must have known, too, that by keeping silent he risked charges of complicity. But the joy of their company had not been something he had been able to hide. So things had carried on that way for many months. Ruth and Charlie would slip into the inn late at night while the people of Sardis slept, happy and ignorant, and Nicholas would sit quietly behind the counter in the small lobby up front, feigning ignorance himself. But then Ruth had gone over a month without her period. It wasn't something she had ever kept close record of, but it would have been difficult not to notice. Not to mention she had just felt pregnant, much like she could feel a cold before she ever sneezed or blew her nose. And then came the hunger, the nausea, the tenderness in her breasts, in her abdomen, in her heart. A few months later, she and her friend Helen had sat over a baby book in the attic, looking up names. It had been hot out, and hot in the attic itself, and Ruth had felt the heat of her own body rising out from her collar. Theodore, Helen had read, gift of God. Too churchy, Ruth had said, and it'll be a girl anyhow. Here, Annabelle. It means grace or favor. Helen had shut the book and leaned close with a roguish grin on her face. Sweat shone in a thin film over her brow. So, she said, who is it? Who is who? Oh, stop it already. Everyone wants to know. Is it David Thatcher? Andrew Lawson? Madison said she saw you walking home with Bubba Parker last week. Ruth had not responded at once. I'll tell you who it is. But there's a condition. You can't say nothing to Madison. And you can't say nothing to no one else either. Not even Tommy? Especially not Tommy. Helen had put an ear to Ruth's lips. Helen? Yeah? No one means no one. Not a soul. I want you to swear it. Swear in your firstborn. Oh, come on, Helen. Okay, I swear I won't say nothing. I curse my firstborn if I squeal. Now tell me. Well, he ain't from here, for starters, so you won't know him. Ain't from Alabama either. Georgia then, or is it Mississippi? It's neither. It ain't even the States if you want to know the truth. Or any other place for that matter, because there ain't no father. I conceived my baby out of thin air, just like Mary in the Gospels. Helen had paused momentarily in thought. Then she had shot to her feet and stormed right out of the house. Ruth gave a shout and doubled forward, her reverie broken by a new set of contractions. She could see before her in the dark glass doors of the inn a miserable shade of her reflection. She held her stomach with one hand and grabbed the handle with the other, holding herself up. Nicholas was behind the counter and he came to her at once, his eyes wide. "Mein Gott," he said. "Is it time already?" She was blowing quickly through her mouth and nose. "Where's Charlie?" she said. He put her arm around her shoulder. "Come away from the door, they will see you." "Charlie, he is not here." "Charlie is not here, but I am sure he will beat the rain." The parlor walls seemed to vacillate in the orange glow of the countertop candle. She held his shirt as he went and blew it out and continued on through the corridor. A smell of heated wax and old wood. A dozen doors or more lined the walls. They turned into the first room, and he laid her gently on the bed and took a match to the candle on the nightstand. She could hear thunder, deep and distant, through the window. "I am sure he will beat the rain," Nicholas said again, stepping away. "Hold on," she said. I need you to help me." A sudden rigidness entered his figure. After a moment he took her hand in his own and held it briefly and then let it go. "I cannot deliver your baby." "That ain't it," she said in a thin voice. She reached and pinched the folds of her red maternity dress at the waist and tugged it back over her thighs and hips and over her great hump of a belly. Then she stretched her fingers down toward her panties. "Look," she said. "I can't reach." His eyes went wide with understanding. Quickly he shook his head. "I must not," he said. "Charlie will beat the rain, I am sure. He will undress you, but I must not." Her breaths were coming swiftly, shallowly. She could feel her insides bracing again, more powerfully than before. She took his bony old hand and squeezed and sucked air through her clenched teeth. She writhed grotesquely to the beat of the birth pangs, and when at last they had passed, she began to sob quietly. His touch gave her mild alarm. He didn't speak as he lifted her legs and drew her garments down over them. He gasped. She must be bleeding. He went over to the closet and came back with a folded beige towel which he positioned beneath her. Then he backed away, looking down at the floor. "I must go now," he said in a whisper. "But Charlie will be here soon. I promise. I promise." And then he was gone. Alone again. And the baby would come any minute. She watched the doorway for a long time. Where was Charlie? He was supposed to have beaten her to the end, and he was never late. Never. But there was still another soul whose absence she despaired. Her mind darkened to think of the one she had intended to tell of Charlie and the baby many months ago. Her brother, Bill Clayton. A man in whom she had once confided all things. Ruth had always been close to her brother, even more so after their mother's kidneys had failed and they had been left with her father, the mayor, who saw them only as stage props in a political theater. But when Ruth had become pregnant, things had changed between them. Bo had looked at her differently, talked to her differently. He had stopped having time for her. One of the very last people in town to learn of her pregnancy had been her father, who had overheard a conversation between his associates. He had driven right over to Buckley High and pulled her out of class. "Show me," he had said. "Not here, Daddy. Here." She had looked both ways before lifting up her t-shirt. "Christ crucified," he had said between his teeth. "You're a goddamn whore." Before long, his political calculations had cranked out a single, unchallengeable solution. Ruth was to be out of the house by the end of the week. He hadn't cared where she went so long as she went. Tacitly, of course, they had both known that she would move in with Beau, who owned a small house in Oak Street, but that was beside the point. How heavy her heart had become then, when she had gone with tears in her eyes to tell her brother the news, only for him to shut the door in her face. But that was all behind her now, as she took 2 fistfuls of the comforter and held them fast. The time between the contractions had dwindled and vanished, and the pain had become as constant as a drum roll, though she could also sense something pleasant in the labor. And looking down in the direction of her toes, she could see how large her breasts had become in her body's preparation to nurse a baby. She had noticed it before, but only now did she decide that she liked it. A warmth moved within her. Even now she was thinking of Charlie, the way he would infect you with his smile, the way he could find the good in any situation, no matter how bleak or how grim. He would be here any minute. She was sure of it. Nicholas had promised, and Nicholas could be trusted. 2 blades of lightning sundered loudly the western sky, and a torrent of rain broke down from the clouds. With the arrival of the storm, the contractions of her uterus ramped up feverishly. She was blinded by a sharp white pain, and she could no longer think about Charlie or Nicholas or Beau or her father. She could no longer think about anything at all. In spite of herself, she howled and screamed and sent up a volley of oaths into the dark room, cursing even God himself. But unlike Mrs. Atwood, she would have no one to support her, no one to console her. That's chapter 1. Sort of a quick little synopsis. The book is actually about Ruth's son, who grows up in the town. He's taken by Ruth's brother, and the main character, maybe counterintuitively, is going to be the one white kid in town who's willing to sacrifice everything to be his friend. So, just published on March 22nd. Tell me what you're reading so I can give you a good introduction.
Bright Veil.
Huh?
The Bright Veil.
This is...
And the new poem as well.
Bright Veil and poems.
It's corrosive.